Welcome to Beyond the Filter, a podcast about censorship. I'm Brandy.
And I'm Jeremy. In July 2025, payment providers Visa and MasterCard pressured Steam and itch.io to remove thousands of adult and LGBTQ+ games after a campaign led by Collective Shout, an Australian anti-pornography lobby group. At almost the same time, a new United Kingdom law, the Online Safety Act, commenced requiring users to provide ID to access many websites with adult content, including not only porn sites, but also Reddit, Blue Sky, and Spotify, among others. So payment industry censorship and age verification are twin weapons in a war on pornography and adult expression, weapons that are often wielded outside of democratic accountability. Brandy and I are going to be talking about this today with Michael McGrady, a journalist who covers porn and censorship on his beat. Welcome to Beyond the Filter, Michael.
Thank you for having me, both of you.
So we've had porn on the internet for 30 years. Why now, in 2025, are we suddenly seeing these big moves from both the payments industry and governments to crack down on it through financial pressure and age verification? What has changed?
Well, this isn't new. We have to date back, at least through the American perspective, because the vast majority of pornography is produced out of the United States. The industry itself, as we know it today, is probably one of the leading phenomena, or whatever the word is, that really drives technology. That's been well documented. I think that what we're seeing now in 2025, current trend of all of this aggressive campaigning by the anti-pornography movement and the utilization of pressure campaigns on companies like Visa, MasterCard, financial institutions of the sort, fintech, you name it. It dates to about the 2020 campaign that was kicked off by a New York Times opinion contributor, the Pulitzer Prize winner, Nicholas Kristof, who wrote the now infamous column, The Children of Pornhub, which, even by journalistic standards, has been considerably divisive and heavily criticized, despite its important messaging related to non-consensual material appearing on otherwise accessible platforms by literally entire populations of countries, equating to the traffic. I think that what we're seeing now is just in part of that, what I would call this renewed holy war on porn, if you will, and Collective Shout, from what I've studied of them and just these organizations in the anti-pornography sector. I call it a sector, or like an industrial complex or whatever. It's complicated to dismiss that Collective Shout is ultimately using tactics that are tried and true. And It's not like this is just now happening. It's happening all the time. It's just Collective Shout took cue from the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, from, the Trafficking Hub campaign, campaigners like Layla Micklethwait, Don Hawkins. It kind of goes to that with what they're doing now, saying that they're protecting children, quote unquote, but they're not. They're pushing for financial censorship through pressure campaigns.
So it's been a drip. It's not just all of a sudden that this has happened.
Would you say it connects back to just the internet becoming more mainstream and centralized as well?
100%. The internet made it possible for a website like Pornhub to be a household name, both good and bad. No one wants kids seeing pornography. Obviously, I don't think you guys do either. That's clear. I don't either. But when it comes to what I call the strategy of the Helen Lovejoys of the world, I don't know if you've seen The Simpsons. Helen Lovejoy always. Helen Lovejoy. Yeah. Helen Lovejoy is the
Simpsons.
Yeah. Helen Lovejoy is the preacher's wife. And she's like, think of the children. What about the children? So this is not new. It just comes in various forms. It's like consistent, and it's not drip, like you said, Jeremy. It's more a flood now.
Yeah, I mean, it's really become something that's burst into public awareness, hasn't it? I mean, before there were a few people sitting up and taking notice. You've been one of them, but I think now a lot more people are aware of what age verification and financial censorship can really do. Especially people, like I said, in the UK, who are now finding they're having to, submit to facial scans to be able to access mainstream websites. People are not able to download games today that they could have downloaded last month. So do you see age verification laws and financial censorship being two sides of the same coin, both serving as tools of moral regulation outside of direct state censorship?
Well, obviously I do. The whole conundrum of censorship in itself is a product of the same source. It's moral panic, it's moral outrage. And in my time covering this beat in my academic work, and really just my time having covered other controversial industries like the vaping industry, the marijuana legalization efforts, even tobacco, even though there are literal health issues with like smoking a cigarette, right? The approach is, you have to reduce the harm reduction.
Yeah.
And censorship, from everything I've seen, especially when it comes to speech products like pornography, games, product that is speech, that is protected by, like the U.S. Constitution here in the United States, or other statutes or positive law that protects freedom of expression in some capacity, that goes against the censorship effort is not harm reduction. It's a full blow. It's full blow hammer to, smashing down on stone and causing things to crack and fall apart. That's why we have such a inconsistent enforcement regime of age verification laws in the United States. That's why there's such a backlash to age verification in the Online Safety Act in the United Kingdom, and the efforts in France, and then everything that's happening in Germany. Not to mention Australia. Don't get me started on Australia. But it's definitely related.
So you mentioned briefly your academic work, and in fact, you sent me some of that to take a look at, and relating to the effects of age verification laws specifically. So can you tell us what are some of the findings that you've found in your research?
So that research is preprint and it's preliminary, but I am in talk with peer-reviewed publications, several of them. But I am getting ready to release a popular medium, a popular news outlet called Tech Dirt, a column. Maybe Tech Dirt, I still have yet to hear back from them, so don't quote me on that one. But I am working to release findings that basically present age verification laws not only as a speech issue, but as a labor issue. The conundrum with that is that people who engage in content creation are engaging in what I call a speech product, speech industry, where they use their expression, they use their speech, they use their natural abilities to express themselves and to earn an income. Age verification laws, by definition, restrict speech in certain groups of people from viewing that speech. That harms people's ability to make a bottom line. That harms revenue generation. That harms people's incomes. Obviously, it's a complex issue. We can kind of break it down maybe to like sex workers' rights, or we can break it down to game designers, or even just influencers on social media. If their audience can't access their content, their audience isn't going to buy their content, therefore they're not earning any income, therefore they are suffering the consequences of direct and indirect aftermath of an age verification law or age assurance law or whatever they call it, or some sort of content restriction that is eliminating their ability to earn an income and, at least keep a house over there.
So some websites like YouTube right now are giving users the option to provide government IDs or credit card information or even selfies to verify their age. But what are some of the privacy risks or other potential consequences of giving out this information and having it linked to one's online accounts?
So what Google is trying to do through YouTube, and Google owns YouTube, what they're trying to do is look at your internet history through Google, through YouTube, to ultimately affirm that you are of a certain age to have that account. That is being tested right now in the United States, I believe. But what YouTube is trying to do with like the age gating and the age requirements per like the Online Safety Act in the United Kingdom is that they're forcing their consumers into using vendors of companies that do these age verification checks, even though they may be legitimate, trustworthy companies. These consumers do not know these companies. So like a company like Yoti, right? Yoti is a very large, possibly the leading right now company in the age verification safety software industry, whatever they call themselves now, age verification providers association or whatever. They're based in London. They have some of the most secure age checks available, but what they do, and this is just from basic operational security studies, they say that their systems are impenetrable, that when they deploy their solutions on a client's platform, that the data automatically is poof, it disappears. But any tech journalist, any consumer that does reading, any software engineer, any IT engineer, any sort of computer or information technology professional worth their spit knows that there will always be something left over. There will be breadcrumbs, there will be hash data, there will be metadata left over. Even if it's completely dumped or completely wiped, there is still some little tidbit of information that is available, especially when they say, oh, our systems can't be hacked. Oh, our systems completely release all of this data and sends it into never to be seen again land or whatever, delete it. But they still have to retain a record that they did a check. And that check could be through an IP address. That check could be through, like I said, hash data. It could be through metadata. It could be through anything that can be used by a party, bad actors to exploit people. What I'm getting at is that what Google is doing, what these companies are doing in general, this isn't just Google. This isn't just X. This isn't just Pornhub. I mean, Alo's the owner of Pornhub. This isn't just these billion-dollar technology companies doing this. It's the fact that these age verification software providers are presenting their software as impenetrable or 100% safe. That, I feel like, is one of the most unethical things of this entire situation with age verification laws.
And you're just talking about for everyday users, this is risky. But your study showed that LGBTQ plus and trans creators are especially vulnerable. So how does this sort of age verification and financial censorship as well, how do they amplify the existing inequalities and vulnerabilities that these marginalized populations have?
Of course, you can't tell by a facial scan if someone's gay. That's stupid. But it's the sentiment of the laws, especially from the people who are presenting these laws, especially here in the United States, that are trying to present a child protection measure through the lens of fighting pornography. But when we hear the term pornography, especially in the current political system and just how literally it feels like all of the Western world has shifted to the right, they think of LGBTQ health information. They think of, just basic information about human bodies. They think of that type of material because that minority rule, that conservative minority rule, tries to present that as pornographic, when in reality it's not. It's health. It's not even erotica in most legal definitions. So what I'm seeing with the age verification aspect, especially in the research that I conducted, we're basically placing an otherization, if that's the right term, in this demonization of LGBTQ plus people, including myself, for just being present in the world, because these laws are being used in a way to be presented through the marketing and the discourse, the political discourse that, we're going to protect our kids from, this evil queer agenda. So let's use age verification to block not only porn, because porn turns men trans or some stupid shit. Sorry for the language. We keep seeing this pipeline of belief where the far-right conservatives in power promote age verification as a tool to protect kids from not only pornography, straight pornography, or even anything along those lines, but also to prevent them seeing anything that is even remotely queer or remotely against the grain of their Judeo-Christian ethic or their Judeo-Christian belief, because it goes against their whole worldview. Therefore, we have people going on these far-right news podcasts and these far-right YouTube channels saying, like, watching pornography turns you gay, it turns you trans. That's not even remotely accurate or even true. Obviously, you're born that way. You're born gay, you're born trans. It's just they use these talking points and they build it on the whole age verification aspect. So it's more or less, it's not the age verification technology itself, it's just the presentation and how that age verification technology will be used to censor. And that has been a consistent theme in the research, where people who are queer, who are trans especially, who are gender diverse, they feel as if the age verification laws, even though it may not currently identify them as transgender or something like that, it's the sentiment behind it.
No, that's very interesting. Another form of age verification that YouTube has suggested is using a user's browser history to try and assume their age, which I feel like could introduce like another form of stigma, and which again connects back to your point about these age verification laws or speech restrictions affecting workers. Like, imagine they have a YouTube channel that gives them funding, and what they do on that YouTube channel is say review toys, like they review action figures or something like that, and then YouTube decides that's a childish hobby, and if you're interested in that, you must be underage, and then all that person's viewers gets flagged as underage, and then they suddenly have this massive drop in viewership because of these laws. This is like something I can imagine happening from this new strategy.
I can imagine that happening too. I have yet to see that myself because algorithms, especially algorithms that are augmented by artificial intelligence and, the invasive nature that machine learning has gotten to, in my opinion, they can misidentify someone and completely use their browser history against themselves. I can see that against that person. I can see that happening. I can't speak to the technical aspect of that as much as I wish I could, but I think that it's possible that we could see this.
So going back to financial censorship for a second, do you think that Visa and MasterCard, and I guess Stripe and PayPal, are enforcing morality because they're ideologically aligned with these conservative groups like Collective Shout, or are they simply afraid of bad PR and lawsuits?
I think it could be a little bit of both. I obviously don't work for Stripe, PayPal, Visa, or MasterCard, or JCB, or any of the other companies that have kind of gotten that tree shake from Collective Shout, but I can see that it's mainly an effort to enforce morality based on what they perceive is the public culture at the moment. And MasterCard and Visa in particular have always had very, very troubling policies against NSFW content, anything that is even remotely erotic or anything that is considered high risk. I think that what we see when a anti-porn lobby group pressures like MasterCard and Visa to completely just eliminate payment processing capabilities for creators of this content, it's more or less to just those companies are just siding with the loudest person shouting in the room, and it's not necessarily that they agree with them. It's more or less, as you kind of alluded to, it's more or less they don't want to get sued or be dragged through the mud any more than they already have.
Another factor seems to be that platforms themselves, like the merchants, if you like, the ones who are receiving the payments, may also be being a bit risk averse. So it seems that some of the gaming platforms, some of the platforms and so on, may be adopting broader takedown policies than they need to, rather than getting to a fight with their processors. Do you think that is more just a strategic capitulation rather than being on board with this censorship, or is the line being blurred? Like when a platform goes further than they need to, what can we attribute that to?
In my view, it's a blurring of those lines because they're making strategic decisions to be risk averse and to be accountable to their stakeholders, but they're also perpetuating the beliefs of these anti-porn lobby groups, of these pro-censorship groups, because this could bring further scrutiny to the actual merchants, the actual payment processors, that can actually lead to something far more nefarious, like those people getting sued, people not using the network, which is just ridiculous to think that they're not using those payment networks, or really any sort of fine from some government anywhere, not even just the United States government, but anything that suggests high-risk businesses. They're going to be risk adverse, so you have to specialize with using a high-risk payment processor, a high-risk merchant processor, or payment gateway provider, which those exist and they're successful, but that still is something that a lot of these companies, a lot of these merchants may not have capital to access, or they want to see that as a last resort. So it's what do we do here? Do we listen to some crackpot on Twitter, or do we just play it safe?
Yeah, and even the high risk processes have some limits, don't they? Like I worked for a client who had to change their policies on some of the edgier BDSM content, like blood play, for example, because fully consensual, nobody gets seriously hurt. But even with their high risk processor, it was too close to the edge, and they just had to change their policies.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've noticed too, especially when we see like alternative toy companies, Sets Toys making non-traditional sex dolls, where they don't want to be attached to that. So maybe they have to come up with a different process by going through blockchain, through some sort of decentralized approach, or their business goes belly up. And it's not like their business is doing anything illegal. It's just, it's controversial because of the subject. It's controversial because of the products.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate to see, because when we have literally trillions of dollars sent through the two largest credit card networks in the world every day.
Yeah,
I don't think they're going to lose. I don't think they should be losing sleep over a $5 purchase on an OnlyFans account.
Exactly. I mean, we had a previous guest who we spoke to, Brandy and I spoke to, who was saying that some things will be identified as bestiality related because there maybe aliens are involved in some kind of fantasy content, and the processor will say, "Oh no, well," or it might be a furry fandom thing where it's a humanoid character that has animal characteristics, and they're like, "Oh no, this is too close to bestiality." And of course, you get the same thing with content that's 18 plus, but has some reminiscence of underage iconography or aspect to it that just trips the wrong filter, and suddenly that's caught as well. So it's Hobbits. Yeah, there you go.
And you're not wrong to point that out. Some of the games that got banned on Steam particularly were these simulator games, but these games even notified their customers, like, this is simulated rape play, this is simulated age play, this is simulated pseudo incest, step sibling incest stuff. Like, it's not necessarily the most palatable content, but people do resort to their fantasies in order to live and function in a society. It's happened since the beginning of time. So that's another very fine line that these companies do have to walk. I can't necessarily speak to that because I've never worked in that space, rather than just covered it as I have, but they use very broad definitions, and these broad definitions are ultimately just very, very inconsistently enforced. They're arbitrary.
Yeah. We'll be having another episode just devoted to the idea of how, the more taboo a fantasy is, the more alluring it can be, because it's so far removed from your everyday life. It's so far removed from your actual sexual practice that, the only way you can explore it is through fantasy. And that's part of what makes it so alluring to a lot of people. So, not wanting to derail this conversation, but we're definitely going to dig into that more deeply in a future episode. So how much of this phenomenon, which you mentioned was culturally based, like the way that the way that the financial intermediaries are acting is not in isolation. They're not an island. They are in a culture, and they're sort of responding to that culture. But how much do you think the recent changes have to do with US cultural politics, especially Christian moral frameworks, versus more global trends?
Well, you got to consider that most of the companies involved in the current Steam itch.io crisis are American-based. They are US multinationals. MasterCard and Visa are all US-based companies. Steam, even though they have a very far-reaching global outreach, the Valve Corporation is based in the United States. itch.io, I have to be sure on their origin, but they have a very large consumer base in the United States. That said, what I've always kind of viewed as the US market is like miniaturized for Commonwealth nations like Australia and Canada, or even the United Kingdom, because the trends are quite similar when we look at what consumers are interested in. What I'm saying, though, is that the current crisis, which has rippling effects across borders, it's a borderless debate on what's acceptable. It does kind of stem from the person and people who are dominating the news cycle in much of Western Europe, much of the major Asian powers, especially in Japan, especially in South Korea. it's being dominated by the moralist agenda and the implementation of like Project 2025 in the United States. It's because Donald Trump is the president. He is such a very verbose, very outspoken man, surrounded by legitimate neo-Nazis and nativists and Christian supremacists, not just Christian nationalists, Christian supremacists who want to ultimately create a form of American culture that reflects their worldview. And that proliferates across the world because a lot of American media, a lot of American entertainment is consumed by the world.
We recently had an election in Australia here, and leading up to that, I did talk to some people who who are the staff working for members of parliament of the party that eventually proved to be victorious, and I was talking to them about the new age verification laws for social media that they're running out, and they basically said that it's just basically an easy win with parents because like one of the big issues that the politicians keep getting from constituents, especially parents, is that we don't want our kids on social media, and so they're just like, okay, fine, we'll just put a ban in. It's because like even though it's not really an effective method, it sounds good to the voters, and so it's it's an easy way to capture another section of the voters in order to get another win.
And that's definitely true because, covering the adult entertainment industry, I do cover basically the largest markets for pornography, and Australia is one of the largest markets for pornography in the world, not to mention the United Kingdom. But what I saw with the age verification laws and the age verification law and the promulgation of the regulations from the safety commissioner's office, it's basically just copying and pasting the intentions and efforts of the conservatives in the United States. And they're imposing it as a responsible, pro-labor, pro-liberal, progressive approach to keeping kids safe, which I think is a very big disservice to the Australian people, because what they're trying to do, especially with banning social media for kids under a certain age, they're basing it off not only ideological complaints, but they're basing it off of bad science. There's no consistent diagnosis in psychology literature and psychiatry literature either. Again, I'm not a doctor, but I do study the social sciences and sociology. There's shows that there's a consensus for a social media addiction. There's no consensus for a pornography addiction. There's no consensus of a internet addiction. Yes, people can demonstrate these terrible behaviors because of the internet. That much is true, but it's not because you're addicted to scrolling. It's not because you're addicted to TikTok. It's not because you're addicted to watching Pornhub. It's not because you're addicted to, watching all of Netflix. It's not because of that at all. It's because it is the feeling of moral panic cultivated by a small but very loud group of constituents that is then latched on by moral entrepreneurs and opportunists who amplify it to turn it into a mass panic. And the elected officials, the government of Prime Minister Albanese, they see that, they say this is a rampant issue, now we have to fix it.
Yeah, I think one of the problems as well is that it's hard to get voters to listen to the nuance. They just want an answer that's that's quick and easy and satisfies that knee-jerk emotional response.
In U.S. politics, I'm so sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. In U.S. politics, there's this phrase, a moral crusade is a good vote getter. And that is exactly what's happening in the United Kingdom. That's what's happening in France. It's what's happening in Australia. That's what they're trying to do in Canada. It's what's happening here in the United States. It's what's happening in Germany. These traditionally strong democratic systems are responding to a non-democratic sentiment held by maybe a small portion of the constituency to such extreme levels that is then amplified to make it feel like that's the whole sentiment of the constituency. And now they're trying to enforce, age checks. Here's my ID. Can I please jack off now? Like, that's literally what it's getting to.
That brings us back to Collective Shout, which is an Australian non-profit, a very small one. They had just over 1,000 contacts who were involved in the action that got those games removed. So how was that possible? We also are part of a small non-profit and we wish we could have that sort of influence. What do we need to do to follow, I guess, Collective Shout's path, but to do it for good?
So my perspective is that Collective Shout benefited from the hard right nature of how the remnants of Twitter X, owned by Elon Musk, have ultimately turned into an echo chamber for, the hard right. A lot of the accounts on Twitter, I believe, and I think there's some evidence to that, are labeled as bots, and they generate moral outrage through programming campaigns that really just use, I hate to put a pun on words, but to shout out this terrible viewpoint as if it is a consistently held belief in the greater society. I think one thing that the anti-pornography lobby does very well this is Collective Shout, this is the National Center on Sexual Exploitation in the United States, this is the Trafficking Hub. They know how to engage their base a lot better than people who are pro-porn, people who are more a little or liberty-oriented on these issues, because people like the three of us, we go out and we speak our truths. A lot of us do this work because it's personal, it has trauma origins to it, maybe. At least that's the case for me. There's a lot of overlap with very sensitive topics that most people probably don't feel comfortable talking about. But, our whole intention is to try and demystify and make it normal to talk about these things. But it's the fear element that the other side uses very well to lift these complaints from a small organization like Collective Shout to go viral status and make it seem like there's this huge consumer sentiment in a multi-million person audience that Steam should not have these games, or Itch.io should not have these games, or that these games should not exist. I think what we need to do, especially for this nonprofit, is we have to learn. We got to learn from that. We got to create our own model based on that, because using our enemies' tactics against them actually could prove successful. I'm not trying to sound like a marketing strategist right now, but that's really the whole sentiment behind it. They've mastered the messaging, and I don't think there's consistent messaging on our side.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have our own bots.
Hey, we have been talking.
Bots.
Yeah, well, we have been talking, Brandy, haven't we, about getting a marketing person to really help with this fight. And we have seen the success of, well, at least the success is yet to be shown, but there has been a upswell of boycotts and open letter campaigns and backlash, basically, to the censorship on Steam and Itch.io. Could public pressure ever turn the tables on these payment processors and governments, or are they? You think so?
Well, let's think about this too, right? Itch.io started re-indexing their NSFW games as long as they were free. They're working with a different payment processor, I think, right now. I have to double check that to find a way to market and sell their NSFW material. At least that's what Itch.io is doing, because Itch.io is more focused on indie games, so it's a smaller, more, I guess, manageable audience to deal with. But with Steam, I think Steam has fallen. I think the Valve Corporation has found itself in a rock and a hard place. It's one of the leading names. It's a household name. Steam is a household name. They made millions, billions maybe. I can't speak to that unless I see their numbers, but I think that it's basically, if we can cultivate the same sort of open letter pressure campaigns to executives, to financial institutions, to credit card companies, to the payment networks, to the payment gateway providers, through the other intermediaries, it could prove successful. But who's going to lead that?
Well,
go ahead.
That's one of the things you mentioned in your research that you shared with me, that there was some fragmentation in advocacy networks in among sex workers and adult content creators. So do we need to build stronger coalitions to challenge age verification and financial censorship?
I think that it needs to be across industry, yes. I think it needs to also be non-sectarian. An example of this is where we see the Free Speech Coalition here in the United States supporting a recent Trump administration executive order that is basically ordering the financial regulators, the FIDC, the NCUA here in the United States, to make sure that there is no discrimination based on the content or the political affiliations of the person who banks with that institution. You know, I can disagree with Donald Trump all I want, but that is definitely one component to this debate that, at least on the financial discrimination front, there needs to be equitable access to banking, no matter what the company or consumer of that banking product does for a living. And that's a decent example of trying to bridge that proverbial gap. But the fragmentation in general needs to be lessened. First, it needs to be recognized more, and then it needs to be bridged through these multiple stakeholder groups from across the political spectrum, and there needs to be a consensus on what freedom of expression is. And that's where things break down, because I never thought I would see a right-wing libertarian organization like Americans for Prosperity here in the United States. It's a Koch brothers network organization, side with the porn industry when it comes to age verification laws.
Yeah.
I never thought I would see that in my life. And I'm seeing that with libertarian groups. I'm seeing that with socialist groups. I'm seeing that with hell in the United Kingdom on this issue, that you cannot regulate, quote, legal but harmful speech in such a manner as they are in the United States and the United Kingdom and Australia. And that's a big thing that I think needs to finally, we need this grand coalition eventually. Obviously, that's going to take a lot of years, and I don't think we're going to see it in the near future, but that's what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's more optimistic than anything, but for the interim, I think that's just more, there just needs to be a unified messaging among the like-minded groups that we're a part of, that we're in those networks, that just needs to start building that basis out and showing that we're stakeholders that are just as valid as the other stakeholder groups that have their speech regulated.
Another thing that you briefly alluded to was different alternative financial models. And I guess crypto's been around for a while, but it's never had really the mainstream take-up that it needed to replace the big financial networks. Is there any hope of kind of bypassing the Visa and MasterCard networks and coming up with an alternative payment strategy?
That's been done before in the adult entertainment industry. Spaint Chain, for example, is one of those companies that specializes in blockchain development, especially on Ethereum. But, they still are at the whim of the gateways. They're still at the whim of the networks, because how do you see a cryptocurrency in fluid currency, an actual real currency that you can use in person to pay your bills?
Yeah.
We see these crypto wallets saying, no, you can use your MasterCard debit card or your whatever card and attach it to your crypto account and use it like cash. That's still reliance on a credit card network that is considerably arbitrary in their enforcement of the rules. There's no guarantee either that consumers en masse will be able to educate themselves on how to use a crypto wallet. For how simple they've made it over the years, it's still complicated for like the 45-year-old single mom living in the Midwest of the United States, having to pay tuition for her 2 kids. That's still, there's very little accessibility, and there's still that knowledge gap, and I think that is still generational in aspect, but it's still just, how do we do that? And I can't answer that, because like I said, my focus is more or less on the fact that age verification and financial discrimination, financial censorship, though of the same issue, is still censorship. And that's kind of where we're at. It has to be more central. It has to be a more concerted effort to promote decentralization, but decentralization has not taken like they said it would. It's just, at this point, to a lot of consumers, not necessarily me, is just another gimmick.
There's definitely a sort of a tech bro libertarian kind of stigma around using crypto as well.
Yes, there very is, and I as a Democrat socialist myself, I get a lot of crap from my network, my friends in the party, and my friends in the movement who are like, oh, you invest in crypto? What are you pro Elon Musk? No, I just thought I would give it a shot, and it's not like I use it all the time, and I don't have that much money in it. It's like I genuinely believe that the current decentralized systems that we have for payment are not sufficient enough to beat the banks, because
I'll,
guess who's going to buy it? The banks.
I'll admit I am one of the people that kept rejecting crypto, but mainly because I couldn't figure out how to use it.
See, there's that knowledge gap, right? It's not that it's not that these people are dumb. It's not that there's this stupidity. There's none of that. There's this knowledge gap that consumers still, even though it's far more accessible to consumers, there's still this knowledge gap that it's just not going to be bridged. So there's been no successful model, and every model that we see that has some success is still heavily shrouded in far right, far libertarian tech bro sentiment, and it is just not only from a optics perspective, it's not suitable for the solutions that we need it for. I'm not trying to discourage alternatives to traditional banking. I'm most certainly not. I'm very, very open to that. But every sort of crypto project that I've seen that specializes with sex workers has either failed or has ultimately, well, it's failed. It's not reached the level that it should, and that's unfortunate. I really think that there's a lot of promise there, but it's just not developed.
Yeah, just two things. Just an anecdote. My sister did get interested in crypto and was researching it on YouTube. And the moment she started doing that, she started getting the algorithm started feeding her all this sort of manosphere alt-right content, even though she was just interested in crypto, none of that other stuff. But I do feel like the left and progressive spaces, ironically, kind of reject technological solutions sometimes. And those tech solutions, they do often have sort of like iffy ethical sort of elements to them, like crypto and AI with the environmental aspect, and AI with the sort of copyright issues. But it also feels like we're like not using all the potential weapons in our arsenal.
And I would agree to that. I have suffered enough cancellations in my career, and I think I live in a conservative state in the United States. I teach college at a conservative college. I write about pornography and the law behind it. I am a target rich environment for these people.
Yeah.
Being someone as left-wing as I am and bisexual openly, even though I have a female partner, she's bisexual herself, but it's just like I'm a target-rich environment for those people. But it's just, I think that there is such a discouragement to use the tactics of the enemy against them. And again, I don't mean to speak so tactically or to call people enemy, but it's just, when I think like that, I kind of go back to my days when I was reading political theory in my undergraduate, and I read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and it's just like, you know what? I could probably use this in my career, and I have for some cases, but it definitely, when we are talking about this immediate issue and this theoretical situation, I think that we need to find our art of war.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've been talking a lot about why the censorship, financial and otherwise, is the wrong approach to protecting children. We've spoken a little bit about how we can fight back and alternatives such as other financial models that we can use to try and avoid that censorship. But if this was really about protecting children, what should regulators be doing? What should we be doing instead to create a safe environment for children that also doesn't result in the slow death of the open internet?
So in my time covering this space, and I've come to the conclusion that there's not going to be a perfect solution, and there never is. But what I've always promoted when I've spoken to crowds about this, when I've guest lectured, when I have written about the issue, it's about putting putting public monies, putting tax dollars to work to the things that need to be funded. It's a holistic issue. We're seeing such demonization of comprehensive sex education in schools. We're seeing a lot of frustration with teaching, alternative, not even alternative, just teaching material that is considered controversial to some groups. It just so happens that those groups that find that material controversial are in power. So the solution first is, I wish the government, especially state governments, at least in the framework of the United States or any country that has some sort of federalism, like Australia, is that those state governments should be using monies to promote public education campaigns, not only to target teenagers and preteens, the most at-risk group there, but also parents, to promote the deployment of the restricted to adults label that is developed by the Association of Sites Advocating Child Protection, or the use of existing parental filters, or the use of Safe Search. Easily accessible campaigns that go so far as to showing that parents already have these tools in their pocket, in their phones, to ultimately show, like, you can protect children starting at the home. Then you add the layer of the school. You can actively protect children by teaching them that pornography is fiction. It's not real. Like 99% of all pornography on the internet that is produced by a reputable studio and is accessible on the largest and most popular adult websites, 99% of it, the overwhelming majority of it, is consensual. It's produced in a regulated environment that has to be taught. Then it's ultimately my rant here is it's education that needs to be done at the lowest levels possible, at the earliest years possible, to show that, you know what, there is a completely different perception of the younger generation about sex. There's a completely different perception of why maybe playing a game that simulates a non-consensual experience may be therapeutic for some people. Obviously, it has to be age appropriate, of course. I'm not saying, like, show kids pornography in school. I'm not saying have kids play porn games. I'm not doing that, period. I'm saying that there needs to be discussion about this stuff, because this stuff exists. But there also needs to be discussion with parents and teachers and educators, really anybody in a community that says, chances are you probably have these thoughts, right? So why are you going to completely make it worse for everybody else if you're going to overreact to a game that maybe your child shouldn't have been playing in the first place, and maybe you could have prevented by actually having parental filters on your phone or something along those lines, maybe doing your job as a parent. For some reason, that is a very controversial opinion.
I was just gonna chime in and agree with you, because I cannot tell you how much I just want to scream. The parental filters are right there every time they try to make it just like a responsibility of the government or the website, when the tools are right there.
And a lot of people don't know this, but the adult entertainment industry does fund parental filters. There are companies that develop widely used parental filtering software that are funded by the adult entertainment industry. The Association of Sites Advocating Child Protection, a nonprofit, 1C3, and they have a 501c4 social welfare organization designation too. They are one of the largest confidential child sexual abuse material reporting tip lines in the world. But guess who funds that organization? Entirely. Companies that operate in the adult entertainment industry space or adjacent to it. People don't know that. Not to mention, all these major platforms now, as good optics in federal law in the United States and other laws around the world, they report to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They do all of this stuff, but there's still a need to push this fear of age verification and financial discrimination against people who simply just are making a living in content that is intended for the audience that they intend it for. Obviously, it's not a perfect system. I mean, I admit, the first time I saw pornography was when I was 12. That fits the research, unfortunately. But it's just that I don't blame the system for that. I blame the fact that I was, going through puberty. And my parents just didn't have the parental filters on. And I was raised in a conservative family. So sexuality and sex and gender and all these topics were not discussed.
A lot of the fight against sexualization of children is really a fight against hormones. And that's a fight that you're going to lose. So, yeah, I think we really appreciate all of your insights, Michael. We're going to start wrapping it up. But are there any final comments that you want to leave us with?
I think that when we're discussing the concerns of censorship in general, especially on the front of financial censorship, a lot of these issues can be resolved outside of the realm of finance or outside of the realm of online safety. It is as I said, it is something that can be done at the lowest level in society, which is the community, which is the family. And, I'm not trying to sound all preachy or family values or anything like that, but it's just, parents are equipped to do this. They're just not educated. And I think that is a failure of the system in itself, not that kids can access pornography. It's the system of the failure that parents don't know about how to prevent their own children from seeing pornography. And all of this goes into the same debate. Age verification as censorship, financial discrimination as censorship. People are reacting. Therefore, there's a chain reaction. But these chain reactions can be lessened or completely avoided if you get to the source of the chain reactions before they actually happen.
Very wise words. Well, thank you very much for everything you've said, Michael. We've really enjoyed having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Could not agree more with everything you were saying, pretty much. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who's listening, and we'll see you all again next month when, with the way things are going in the world, I'm sure we'll have more to talk about.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.